welcome to this evening's video, or evening for me. I'm going to talk about Lina Heydrich, who was the wife of Reinhardt. As it is a live thing, so you can ask questions about Lina or a husband or other questions. I'm sure somebody's going to ask me the question: should he have been assassinated or not? But anyway, but if it doesn't get asked, then I'll do that in a separate video some other day. The Lina, for me, is, in my opinion, one of the most disgusting people of the entire Third Reich. Third Reich sort of specialized in particularly disgusting people, but Lina, more than anybody else, really takes the biscuit, as they say where I come from. Anyway, never mind about that. Let's get straight into it. So Lina was born in 1911. Her parents were of Danish nobility, Lina van Osten, and they came from near the island of Fehmarn, or near, but on the Schleswig-Holstein side, the side where the mainland was. And so they were people who, it would appear that they had been aristocracy, but they'd fallen on hard times. And in his book, Hitler's Hangman, Robert Gavath, which I really want to strongly plug here as being one of the best books that I have read on this period, and certainly as far as a history written years later after the events, then it is one of the best of the period. Anyway, so Robert says that he suggests, he doesn't say this, he suggests that they're falling on hard times might have had something to do with the territorial changes that happened in 1863. A first war of German unification, as I call it, was the war between Prussia and Austria against Denmark, and this part of the world fell. Hello, Annie. Fell to Prussia. So the and I don't quite know how they fell on hard times, but it seemed they did. But the problem is this: aristocrats who fall on hard times often have become somewhat resentful. They resent the position they're in, and as a result, this can often translate into extreme right-wing politics. And this was actually no exception. Lina had a number of brothers and sisters. Her father was a school teacher, and her older brother, Hans, he was a year older than she was. He joined the Nazi Party and then the SA, the Sturmabteilung, in 1928. Now, her future husband grew up in Halle on the Saal. I have a video, can't remember if I posted it yet. No, I don't think I've posted it, of the house he grew up in. And he also came from parents who'd been really wealthy, and then they'd fallen on hard times. His father, in fact, had grown up in poverty. He'd made himself quite wealthy, and in his older years, he became really poor again. So it was that was a quite sad story, really. Reinhard Heydrich was too young to have served in the war, but he did join the Navy in 1922. He got himself around a bit. And one day that there was a Navy dance, so there was a dance so that young ladies could meet Navy officers. And when he was there, he and Lina actually met. So they were talking all evening. He arranged for a date. He took her to a wine bar and out for a walk. This is only the second meeting, and on the second meeting, he suggests that they got married. Now, Lina she finished school, and then she was studying to be a nurse, so she was still doing her nursing studies at the time. Now, Lina was quite taken aback at this proposal because it was all so sudden. Parents knew nothing about the relationship, but Reinhardt was quite insistent, and he managed to convince her. She introduced them to the parents, and the parents were really quite happy. Now, they're quite happy because, well, stands to reason. I mean, what father who felt that he'd fallen on bad times because he'd once been an aristocrat, then his daughter meets a naval officer. The naval officer who's got a good wage, he's got a nice uniform, he's got respect, and he's going to have a salary. Sorry, not a salary, a pension. He's going to have the pension pretty quick. Now, anyway, so everything's sort of really good, and they decide that they send out the wedding invitations. Now, this is something I just cannot understand what happened next. Reinhardt sent out an invitation to another woman he'd been seeing at the same time as he'd been seeing Lina. And despite the fact that they had he'd been engaged, he'd continued to see this woman. Now, he'd met this woman at another dance. It seems like a good place to pick ladies up, at the Colonial Society in Berlin. And because the two of them been sleeping together, she had somehow assumed that she was going to be Mrs. Heydrich. Now, indeed, she'd even been stopping with him at his officers' quarters on the Navy base. Now, she was quite put out about this. Indeed, she had a nervous breakdown. Now, the identity of this lady is not known, but her father must have been pretty well up in the naval administration. Maybe he'd known somebody like Admiral Raeder, or maybe even Canaris for that matter. I don't think he'd been Canaris though, because Canaris and Heydrich were good mates between themselves. And but anyway, so he then father made an official complaint to the Navy. Now, so the Navy had to have a board of inquiry to find out what happened. Now, obviously, a naval officer is expected to act as a gentleman and not sort of be seeing two lasses at the same time. But boys will be boys, and this wouldn't have been enough for him to lose his job. Anyway, the thing was this though: he came up before the Naval Board of Inquiry, and he was so arrogant at the Board of Inquiry, and he blamed the lady for what had happened. It was she'd wanted to sleep with him. She'd forced him into doing it. It wasn't his fault. He besmirched her. Now, the paperwork for this Board of Inquiry has, surprise, surprise, gone missing. I suppose that happened during the Second World War. Sorry, during the Nazi period sometime. I suspect he got rid of the paperwork as soon as he could. And but the people who did it survived, and they were able to recount what had happened. And they confirmed after the war that Heydrich had been sacked because of his own behavior. He had besmirched the honor of the lady concerned, so he was kicked out of the Navy. Now, we're now coming into the period of the Great Depression of the 30s. He's lost his job, and that was a rather bad time to actually become unemployed. What's going to happen now? Well, clearly he can't marry Lina because he's got no future. He's got no way of supporting her, and his parents can't do it, and her parents can't do it, so he's somewhat stuck. Nonetheless, Lina, who sort of claimed afterwards that she thought of maybe giving him the dump, didn't kick him out or split up. But there was somebody who she knew, who knew Himmler, and strangely enough, this person, an aristocrat, had his mother was the godmother of Heydrich. He came from Halle on the Saal. Eberstein was his name. He was. It's been suggested by one author that Himmler sought out aristocrats because he thought that they were sort of blue blood, and they would be they'd be patriots, and they would be just the sort of stuff he wanted in the SS. He didn't want this riffraff from the council house estates in there. So that was that. that was what happened. Now, Himmler had this idea. He really didn't want all this riffraff joining the SA and joining the party. He didn't know who they were. They could be plants from the Communist Party, of the Social Democrats, or indeed from the government. There was political police in Germany, and they were spying on the Nazi Party. Didn't do a very good job of it, as it turned out. But anyway, that's another story. So Heydrich decided he needed a security service. He needed somebody to run a security service. In fact, he needed somebody to be the security service because he had no one else. So Eberstein found out about this. He contacted Himmler. Himmler suggested, yes, send the young lad down. And then, so Heydrich made an appointment with Himmler. Himmler sent a telegram, though, to say he was ill. But Lina said, ignore it. Just go down there anyway. So he got the train down to Munich. Eberstein met him at the railway station and took him round to Himmler's chicken farm, which is just outside the town. And Himmler, despite being ill, agreed to see him. Now, at this moment, they found out there was some kind of a misunderstanding. Eberstein, either through ignorance or because he was trying to build up Heydrich, had said that he had been a security officer. In fact, he hadn't been that. He'd worked on the radios a bit, but that was it. But nonetheless, Heydrich liked detective novels, so Himmler told Heydrich to just do him a sketch of how he would organize a security service for the SS and for the Nazi Party. He did this, and Himmler, who probably also liked these type of detective novels but didn't know as much about them as Heydrich did, was so impressed that he made him his Sicherheitsdienst person. In fact, he was the only one there. He had to share a telephone. He had to share a room in his own apartment with somebody else who was running some other organization for Himmler. But anyway, so then Lina and Reinhard could actually get married because he now had a job, and they got married on the 26th of December of 1931, and they moved to Munich in 1932. Now, at the wedding, which was done by Protestant rites, but they also sang the Horst Wessel song, the Horst Wessel Lied, and Lied, sorry, not lead, Lied. Horst Wessel Lied. Sorry, song is Lied, not lead. Lead's what you keep a dog on. And anyway, so they knew that it was being watched by the political police because all sorts of Nazis actually turned up for it. But there were so many of them, the church was packed out, and it's strange that the Protestant minister allowed this to actually go to allow his church to be decked out with swastikas as well. Anyway, so this seems great. They all moved down to Munich. The following year, there is the seizure of power. Now, Germany is a federal state. It was a federal state as well in 1933, or at least at the beginning of 1933 it was. And so there's governments in all the states of the country. The states which exist today are not the same as they were, obviously, in 1933. The borders have changed somewhat, but one state that was almost the same, very tiny border differences, is Bavaria. In Bavaria, this is the state which has given birth to Nazism. This is where main Nazis actually came from, but this was the last one actually to back down. Now, what happened was that the Nazis had run their own private army, the SA. They had this security sort of organization, the SS, and now in Heydrich had his SD, which by this time he had a couple of more people working with him. Heydrich was at the office. He went into the government ministry. He asked his wife if she would go and get his gun and his uniform for him. And but then she describes in letters to her parents what actually happened to people. Now I'm going to suggest you actually have a look at Robert Gavath's book. Also, you can also see in his book the love letters that Reinhardt sent to Lina beforehand. He's clearly absolutely love struck with this 19-year-old and 20-year-old girl that he's met at the beginning of the relationship. The messages that she sends to her parents are quite, really, they show an utter brutality, a glorification of the violence that's being meted out to the Social Democratic and party and Bavarian People's Party members of Parliament and the Minister of the Interior who's beaten up. There's also some Jewish people are brought in and they're tortured, and she is glorifying in this what they're actually doing to these poor people. Now, one of the problems was in many places that in Prussia, for example, Hermann Goering actually controlled the police. And because he had got control of the police, this allowed them then to effectively become a part of the Nazi party before the elections of March of 1933. Obviously, in Bavaria, they didn't yet have control of the police. But nonetheless, but after the elections of 1933, they got the control there as well. Now the problem is this: is that Heydrich is running this security service, and he can only justify his raison d'être by finding enemies of the state. Now, all right-wing regimes, and I think the logic and most extreme left-wings were as well, let's say extremist regimes in general, they must find enemies. Because if they don't find enemies, they've got no one to blame for things that go wrong. I mean, Stalin, he's a brilliant example of this. It was never the fault of the Communist Party. It was always the fault of somebody else. That's why communism never actually advanced. And the thing was this, is that Heydrich was actually doing this as well. He was presenting things, potential enemies. Even the Communist Party by about 1935 was absolutely no threat whatsoever to the Nazi regime, but he had to make it seem that there was this threat. Now, Heydrich, when they met, he had never heard of Mein Kampf. He had never, he called Goebbels a cripple, and he made jokes about Hitler being a Bohemian corporal. So these were joke characters as far as he was concerned. However, he wanted to marry this woman so much that he buckled in to the ideology of the parents. So it is Lina, who was only 19 years old, who, under the influence possibly of her parents and her older brother, who was only 1 year older than she was, that converted this person. He was a narcissist, for that there's no doubt. He was arrogant, he was unpleasant, but he wasn't the racist that he was later made out to be. Indeed, at school, Reinhard Heydrich had Jewish friends. His the business his parents owned was to a large extent, it had a number of Jewish clients. They had a music conservatory, and this, to me, it seems to be something above all sort of something a Jewish thing to do, to send your kids to some music conservatory so they learn to play whatever it was, the piano and the violin or whatever. And so this the Van Ostens, this is my argument anyway, converted Heydrich into being this organizer of this terror. Now, in the 30s, so he's hard working, so to speak. He's at the office. Well, it would appear that most of the time he wasn't at the office. He was out on the town. As actually, when I did the video on Salon Kitty, we know that he set up this brothel in Berlin with Walter Schellenberg. Admittedly, this didn't happen until 1939. And the idea of this was to have something with which they put bugs in it and they try and get information from it. But in my opinion, they just set it up so they'd have a freebie for themselves. That is my opinion. I can't see, and that's based on the fact that they got no information of any consequence, because if they had got any information from it, then they would have said, what it was. I can't see what any information that they got from this brothel. Schellenberg and Heydrich used to like enjoy nights out on the town with the lads as well, although Schellenberg was actually having a sexual relationship with Mrs. Heydrich, with Lina. Now, and that seems to me to be a somewhat dodgy thing to do, but there's so many dodgy things in this story that I'm not making this up, and so I can't explain it any more than I explain why he sent a wedding invitation to a woman he's actually seeing. I can't explain that. Anyway, so this marriage was quite, I think, it was unhappy. But what it did do was it made Lina, it brought her into the establishment elite of the Nazi party. And there's another book I'm going to recommend. It's called Nazi Wives. And a lot of the bits on Heydrich, I think I rely a lot on research done by Robert Gavatt. Came out in 2015. But this story sort of winds all of them, the ones they talk about, the ones that talk about in the book, it winds them all together in a story. So if you like something that goes more like a sort of a novel, although it's historically correct, then that's also a little bit of reading, which I can recommend. Now, in 1939, most of the Nazis themselves, I've got to say this, some of them actually had taken part in the First World War, but as we see later in the war, most of them, when it's their own lives, just like Putin today, they turn out to be cowards. But Heydrich was somewhat different. There's a number of things that he was actually different in. First of all, he was prepared to fight. He took part in flying lessons. He did some flying lessons. And just before the outbreak of World War I, he sent his wife a letter. And it was we didn't send it to her, sorry, it was stuck in the safe, but it survived. And it was meant to be sent to her if he died. And he did say in this letter that some of the, your accusations against me have hurt me very deeply, even because they're not true. And then he sort of gives recommendations what to do about the kids and what have you. He says, you must marry again after time has passed and your soul has healed, words to that effect. But the person you marry must be a real man. So he's not putting up with her marrying somebody who's not a real man. Anyway, so he took part in operations in Poland. He took part in operations in Norway. In Norway, he actually got injured when the plane overshot the runway. And in the Soviet Union, he also, the plane came down, possibly due to engine trouble, but it might have been shot down behind Soviet lines. This was at the very beginning of the campaign. It was feared that he'd been lost, and until some some officer reported in that he'd picked somebody up. It was clearly it had gone crazy because he said he was a general of the SS and he was actually a Heydrich. Anyway, after that, Heydrich didn't have any more flying escapades. But anyway, I've gone a bit too fast, so let's come back to what was happening at the home front. They had 4 children. Of the 4, one of them, incidentally, she became a opera singer, and she's still alive, and so she followed in the footsteps of her grandparents. Now, in 1938, we have the occupation of Czechoslovakia, and in 1941, Heydrich is sent to replace the name of the person whose surname I forgot when doing the video yesterday, Neurath, and he is then put in charge in Bohemia and Moravia, sort of the bit of the Czech bit of Czechoslovakia that didn't include the Sudetenland, which had been occupied by and annexed to Nazi Germany in October in 1938. So they then sent to Prague, and they're living in a really nice castle, which Lina then has done up in a style which suits her, obviously at the expense of the taxpayer. Well, while not, I mean, if the German taxpayer could set up a brothel for her husband, then it could certainly pay for a nice castle to be done up for her just outside of Prague. And here she effectively, they were the lord and lady of the castle, enjoying an incredible amount of power. So now this Heydrich who had laughed at Hitler, who had had no racism. Now he's deciding who in Bohemia, Moravia can be German, who can't be German. Now, yesterday I spoke about Albert Foster here in Gdansk, and how he allowed people to sign the Volksliste and become Germans, so to speak, on paper, even just by an automatic declaration. And von Neurath had done the same sort of thing in his term in Prague as well. But Heydrich, now he believes in this Germanic blood sort of thing. He's going to check everything which had been gone before, and he then starts asking for documentation. Now, obviously, decide who's German and who isn't. That's an incredible piece of work, which it's a huge amount of effort which has to be done, also in being done in times of war. Heydrich didn't like what he called margarine Germans. That is to say, people decided they were German just to get a better ration card. So in places 90% were decided no longer Germans. They had to go back to being Czech and get a Czech ration card, but it might have actually helped them because they didn't actually have to do military service. It needs to be pointed out that the armaments industry in the Bohemian Moravia was extremely advanced, and this is one of the arguments, the really strong argument against the Munich Agreement, where Britain and France somehow decided that they were very generously going to give away large chunks of Czechoslovakia to Nazi Germany. Effectively, what they did was they gave away the armaments which were then used against Poland in 1939 and France and the Low Countries in 1940. Part of what Heydrich had to do, he had to keep the Czech workers happy, and he certainly did try to do that. Now, Heydrich was at the Wannsee conference in 1942. He was the organizer of it. In July of 1941, he printed up something on Goering's note paper saying that Goering was entrusting him with looking after the final solution to the Jewish question. Goering was more interested in shopping trips to France to pick up stuff on the cheap. Seems that he signed it and then just waltzed out of his own office, not thinking what he'd actually signed. This document came back to him at Nuremberg 5 years later, and there are those that say that this was the document that got him hanged. I think he did plenty of other stuff to get him hanged, but it certainly didn't help. The Wannsee conference was not a conference where the decision was taken to murder the Jewish population of Europe. The final decision, in my opinion, was announced by Hitler on the 12th of December 1941 at a secret conference which he held just after the declaration of war against the United States. Anyway, I did a separate video on that, so I won't talk about that now. So the strange thing is, though, is that Lina Heydrich, in later years, she claimed that none of this actually happened, that the Holocaust didn't happen, it was impossible to organize, even though it had been her own husband who had actually organized it. So anyway, they're living now in Prague. They hardly ever see each other, which, I mean, I do appreciate. So this does happen with a lot of people at their age, particularly if the man's got an excuse for not being in town. There is the attempt to kill Heydrich, which eventually becomes a successful attempt. Heydrich died on the 4th of June 1942. He was assassinated. I know somebody's going to say he wasn't assassinated because the assassins didn't actually kill him, because he died of blood poisoning as a result of the assassination. But nevertheless, he's dead. He's gone. And now in Bohemian Moravia, there's this massive search. Indeed, it was the biggest search ever organized by Interpol, as I understand it. And this massive search does eventually lead to the culprits being found. 2 towns were destroyed. One was Lidice, which is very well known. But 4 years ago, I went to Lezaki, And although I still haven't done the video on it, which I mean, I was only here 4 years ago, but you can actually see in one video I did on my other channel about the places I've been to there. But I do need to put that together, the notes on that one about the destruction of Ležáky, which was destroyed. Ležáky is near Pardubice, to the south of Pardubice, in the eastern part of what is today Czechia, and okay, the destruction, there wasn't as many people killed there as there were killed in Lidice, but there's huge amounts of people were actually killed. Now, Lina was so upset at what had happened that she didn't even go to the funeral. The kids were there, but she wasn't. She was pregnant at the time. In fact, the child was born what name was, daughter was born the following year. First daughter was Silke, and I forgot the name of the second one. No, but anyway, never mind. Lina sold the properties. They had a number of properties. For example, on the island of Fehmarn, they had where she came from. They had a holiday home. They had a property in Berlin, and Hitler gave her the castle in perpetuity. That was his gift to her. And she also had a large number of concentration camp prisoners there to look after it. And now we come into the real evil, I think, of Lina Heydrich, because what she would do is she would watch them. She'd sit there inside the house with binoculars watching to see if she could find anybody who wasn't working, and then if she found somebody who wasn't working enough working enough to her satisfaction, she would then order one of the overseers to whip the person until sometimes until they were unconscious, and then she'd just go back, and it didn't bother her in the slightest. She was very deeply racist. She had this utter hatred towards Jews, for example. But it wasn't just Jews that she hated. Now we have an incident somewhat similar to what happened to John Gotti. A son had a bicycle. He went out, the gate was left open. He went out in the street. He got hit by a lorry and he was killed. Lina wanted to have the people with the lorry shot. She demanded it. However, there was an investigation. The lorry driver was found completely innocent of the death, and she was then even more bitter about what had happened. In 1945, as Prague was in fact still held by the Nazis after Berlin had actually fallen, as was, for example, here Wrocław, Breslau, but she escaped a few hours ahead and ended up back in Germany. She went to where her parents came from, and she lived there. Now, her father died around, I can't remember, 1968, something like that, but can't quite remember, I've forgotten. Anyway, it'll come back one day. But her parents were still alive. She went back and lived with her parents. Now, this part of Germany was in the west. It was very close to the border, but with the East Germany, but it was in West Germany, and this was all to her advantage. Now, when her husband had died, she got a pension of 1,200 Reichsmarks a month, and which was quite a lot of cash at the, sorry, no, it wasn't 1,000, it was 1,800, which was a lot of cash. Now, the average wage then was about 200 Reichsmarks a month, which was the same as the cost of a visit to Salon Kitty, and so she had a really good pension. But in the aftermath of World War II, so things got pretty tough. The pensions were stopped. She would have had some of the stuff she'd managed to take with her, of course, stuff which had probably belonged to the victims of Nazism, and so she, but she effectively abused the West German government. The pensions were stopped, but she sued the West German government for the pension, and in the first instance it was refused, but then it went to appeal, And the appeal consideration said the following: it is irrelevant what he actually did, because he was a criminal, they accept that, but he was a general. And as a general, she should get the pension of a general. So she got the pension of a general. And the Czechoslovakian government in 1946 asked for her to be extradited. The British authorities refused. I think this was more because Czechoslovakia had gone over to the communists and it didn't want to upset the people in Germany. I think that's the reason. I don't know. But that seems to be the logic. That's not to say plenty of people were handed over. I mean, for example, yesterday I talked about Albert Foster. Greiser was handed over. The here from Gdansk, the head of police was handed over. Hildebrand was handed over. Plenty of people were handed over to communist countries, but Lina wasn't handed over, possibly because I suspect they thought, well, maybe she wouldn't get a fair trial. But anyway, she was sentenced to life imprisonment in absentia. She, however, just sort of laughed at this, laughed at them. She gave a number of interviews in which she said that glorifying the ages which the time she spent with them. She said it was like a fairy tale. Maybe it must have been like a fairy tale. She was in this palace, this castle near Prague, and she'd had all these people working for her. She managed to obtain the former house that Heydrich had owned on the island of Fehmarn, and she turned it into a hotel. And in this hotel, apparently, there was a place where the old SS, or the old guard, used to meet for the holidays and the conferences and things of that nature. So she was living off the West German taxpayer with the pension of a general that she'd got. When it needs to be pointed out, there were people who were the widows of those that had taken part in the insurrection against Hitler, who ended up with nothing, or they didn't get their property back, which was taken by the Nazis. I actually looked at a couple of cases like this yesterday. I was trying to find out what had happened to one person, what happened to the things that they'd owned, people who had been killed by the People's Court, but they never got their property back. But Lina Heydrich was getting paid, and she was using that money for businesses, which were then being used for old Nazis to actually get together and meet. Whether or not she had anything to do with things like the Northern Rat Line or things like that, I don't know. I suspect that she didn't, because it was just too. She was just too much. It was too obvious who she actually was, and so the police must have been watching her all the time. Her opinion of the West German government was such that when she wrote a book, and the book was called Living with a War Criminal, or I think was translated into English as My Life with a War Criminal. So absolutely ridiculing the West German government and not helping, and showing no sorrow for what he had actually done. Indeed, denying that these bad things had actually taken place, despite these coming up in court. The West German government, unfortunately, couldn't charge her on anything. I will one day, once I've actually understood the attitude of the West German government in the years 1950 to say about 1980, because it changed completely afterwards, and it really started going hard on war criminals. After unification, it started coming down hard on them. But by this time, of course, it was a bit late, and all you get is clerks who worked in offices and things of this nature. But anyway, Lina Heydrich got away with it. Now, there is another book by somebody, Nancy, I can't remember her surname. Nancy did a number of interviews in the 1970s with Lina Heydrich, and she died. Lina died at age 79. The Nancy died around 2012 or something like that. A friend of hers put these things together, and the book has actually come out. And I read only this just before this. I read Richard Overy, the historian of the Nazi period. He wrote a review of this in the Spectator, so there is a bit more information about her there. I haven't read My Life with a War Criminal, and to be quite honest, I suspect I won't, because there is so much information in there which I suspect is wrong. One of the things I did notice, for example, that seems to be a difference of when she thinks she met Heydrich, and not only when but also where, and it sort of goes against some of the other things that we actually know about him. Right, so I hadn't planned on talking about this for 40 minutes, because I thought I'll do 15 and that'll be it. I will do a longer video. Sorry, not the video will be longer, but I'll do another video on this eventually, on her. I was thinking of calling this the most evil woman in the Third Reich, but I think that's unfair, because she herself didn't actually kill anybody physically, but her intervention was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Now, had there been a Heydrich or not, the Holocaust would have happened the same. Of that I have no doubt. Only somebody else would have organized it, and that person who organized it mightn't have been as efficient as Reinhard Heydrich was. Anyway, so I'll go through a number of comments here, so I'll go through them, starting at the beginning. And hello, and yeah, so Ian says that people recently targeted Heydrich's unmarked and supposedly secret grave. Right, yes, I wonder where, I think I know what I've got a vague idea where it is. Ah, yes, that's right, they dug it up, didn't they? They sort of tried to get some bones out or something like that. And Ian says, finds Heydrich even the most terrifying, even more than Hitler. What I find so strange about the Nazi regime, and I do have problems trying to get a grip, is how efficient it was, and bearing in mind that it was doing this for the first time. So it was trying to turn a democracy into a dictatorship. Now, for example, if we look at the way the Nazis today, for example, in Russia, the way that Putin has done it, and then bear in mind that Russia did not have the democratic background that Germany had, so it should have been theoretically it should have been theoretically easier, but it took Putin much longer than it did with Hitler. I can say here in Poland, with the regime in this country, which is clearly attempting to turn it into some kind of authoritarian state, but it's doing very similar things, like the control of the press, putting control of the courts, limiting freedom for this, that, and the other, and but it's taking a much longer time to do it, maybe because it's got to be much more careful, or doesn't know how to do it. I don't know, but Hitler certainly, it's really strange how they managed to do this so efficiently and without a model to base it on. Anyway, I can't answer that. So anyway, oh, sorry, did I say lead? Sorry, it seems like a lead. It is lead, isn't it? It's not lied. Sorry. Yeah, the word for song in German is Lied. Yeah, sorry, L-I-E-D. Sorry. Okay, right. I need to point out, I never studied German. I studied linguistics at university, but I studied French and Spanish. German, I'm self-taught. I've never had any lessons, and so so I can make mistakes. Right. So Colin thinks that the marriage, the Protestant minister probably had very little choice in the matter. Oh, I think in 1931, I think he could have refused the swastikas and all the rest. But bear in mind, the Van Osten family weren't particularly wealthy or anything like that, and the Nazis weren't in power yet, and he'd be upsetting the local police at the same time. And anyway. So Frau Heydrich was a little monster. Yeah, she certainly was. And okay, so Cleo says Lina reminds me of Libby Custer. What, the general? Was the General Custer's wife? I don't know who Libby Custer was. And so Colin says she sounds like the ideal National Socialist wife. Up to a point, I would say no, I'm not going to say the ideal National Socialist wife was Mrs. Bormann, because Martin Bormann's wife was so much into this Nazi politics that when Martin Bormann had a woman on the side, Mrs. Bormann wrote to her and said, you know, it would be wonderful if you sort of live with us, and then when I'm having a child, you can look after him, and then you can have children and I can look after him. So that is probably the ideal National Socialist wife. Now, in National Socialist times, women were seen but not heard. And so when Lina was kicking up a fuss about him being off, probably at their Salon Kitty or something like that, that she shouldn't have been doing that. She should have just said, oh, you're away on business, you're away arresting these communists and social democrats and beating them up, then that's great and fine by me. I'll just sit at home and watch Dallas on the television. Anyway, yeah, Colin says that McCarthyism is a good example for looking for the bogeyman. Yeah, sure. The hunt for communism is strange that the United States, which in Roosevelt's time had done so much to give in to Stalin, to allow Stalin to take over half of Europe, and then in the United States, in a really small space of time, you've got this McCarthyism, which then is attacking anything which is seen, they see as even being progressive, not communist, but just progressive. And it is quite odd. Anyway, that's a bit outside my knowledge anyway, so I'll leave that one. Colin says, didn't Heydrich have a shadowy Jewish grandparent connection? The answer to that is no, he didn't. I've already done a video on this one actually, but I haven't uploaded it yet. This is problems with uploading things. Right, I explained to you where Heydrich's Jewish grandparent comes from. In Heydrich Senior, Mr. Heydrich, had a conservatory in Halle. And so there's this book that comes out, it's called The Music Lexicon, and I think we're now on about the 9th or 10th issue of it. So but then it was more frequently. I think it only comes, I think the last one came out in 1990 or something like that, or maybe it came out in 2017, I can't remember. But anyway, so this lexicon comes out, and it's like a directory of all of the who's big in the music scene in Germany. I'm going to turn around because I see that the light is sort of also, it seems to be a better view at the back now. Is that any better, or is it worse? It's probably worse. Anyway, now there was this character got kicked out of the school that they had, the conservatory, and he knew the person on the editorial board of the lexicon, and what he did was that he insinuated that Heydrich was Jewish, which he wasn't. And the reason for this was that his mother's second husband, who wasn't his father, had a Jewish name, which was Sus. Now, Sus means sweet, and this is a name which is often associated with Jews. For example, there's the Judas Sus, the film, which was made by the Nazis, and which of course was referring to Oppenheimer. But so that is where the idea comes from. So he had a name which sounded Jewish, but he wasn't even his grandfather anyway. He was his mother's second husband, but not his father. So there was also one of Heydrich's uncles married a Jewish lady from Hungary, but he was not Jewish at all. But this rumor comes from that. Now, when the music lexicon was made, I think it was 1917 version, it was put in that he was Jewish. Now, Heydrich actually sued. It went to court, and the lexicon changed it for the next issue, but the damage was done. Now, obviously, this came up later. I mean, it came up in Heydrich's time. There was an essay in there wasn't it can't be an essay. There was an investigation into it. It can't be because Heydrich would have done the investigation. But so there was a Nazi investigation into it, which completely said that this is right. In the early 30s, I think it was 1932, somebody had actually shown Himmler a copy of the 1917 music lexicon. So that is where it comes from, that he was of Jewish descent. It needs to be pointed out, as I said earlier, actually, there was a number of Jewish people at the conservatory anyway. And the son of the cantor, whose name, Lichtenstein, I've forgotten the name of the son. It's gone anyway. But anyway, what his first name was, but his surname was Lichtenstein. They used to hang out together, so there was no, so there wasn't anything like that. Also, need to point out Hitler. People he hung out with in Vienna were Jewish. There was the person Hitler was in business with. Hitler would actually do the painting, and another person would actually sell them. The person was doing the selling. He was Jewish, so and they split the money between the two of them. So it wasn't. Where does this hatred actually come from? In the case of Heydrich, I can give you an answer. It comes from his wife Lina. In the case of Hitler, I don't know, and don't think anybody knows. Right. Sorry. Anyway. So right. Sorry, keeping it. So Kato's watching from Uganda. That's very. That's very good. See some people in Africa watching. Heydrich played the violin, I think, and he was a fencer. Heydrich did play the violin. Not only that, I read an account of how he played them, and it was very moving. It could bring you to tears. He was so into the violin. In fact, I think his father probably would want of him to take over the business, but the business was really not doing very well at all by the time Heydrich would have come of age and capable of looking after it. As for fencing, I think lots of people fenced in those days, so it was sort of the done thing. Having said that, it was largely the student communities which actually fenced, and as Heydrich didn't go to university, then he mightn't have fenced so much. Right, so yeah, another thing, sweepstakes says that he was apparently accused of being Jewish and bullied at school. Yes, there was this did happen. Now, at the time of the 1917 lexicon, so he would have been then 13 years old, and yeah, he was called a white Moses. That was one of the things. I think with kids, they'll get you for anything though, and so I don't really see that. I can imagine that sort of thing happening just about anywhere. All right, von Neurath. So Otto writes that he was at the Wannsee conference. In the film, he talked about his love of Schubert, or a romantic composer in the 19th century. Yeah, I think that must be the one I haven't seen, which is with Kenneth Branagh, whatever his name is, because I've seen the German one on the Wannsee conference, the 1982 one, but I haven't seen the other one. Oh no, what's it called? Conspiracy. But the thing is, the notes we have for the Wannsee conference are it's a summary. So there's no mentions of Schubert or anything like that in there, and the summary is it was highly redacted. This is really important because it was done. Eichmann took the notes. He decided between the two of them what they were actually going to put in. Yeah, I'm going to turn this round here, like that, and I'm going to sit down here and see if that's any better as far as seeing me is concerned. For those that want to see me, maybe nobody wants to see me. Right. Sorry. Sorry. Oh, sorry, there's so many. Oh, sorry, I've just lost so many comments. I've sort of lost the thing. Now, one of the things, sorry, I didn't want to mention this actually. I noticed that when I was a student, that people, we didn't have right-wing people in those days, but there were some people on the extreme left. And so people on the extreme left, and they almost invariably didn't look, how should I put it? They were a bit aesthetically challenged. And I came to I came to the conclusion that being aesthetically challenged had something to do with being extremist political ideologies. So, if you look at the Nazi leadership, I think you'd agree that most of them are highly aesthetically challenged, with the exception of one, and that's Heydrich. I'm not into men myself, so I'm unable to actually say what a good-looking man looks like. But I would argue that he was probably a pretty good-looking man. Now, Lina, on the other hand, again, I don't want to make sexist comments, but I don't really think, I think she is a bit aesthetically challenged. Now, being aesthetically challenged and having extremist ideologies, it's just it's a theory I came up with when I was a student. But I think there may be something in that. Indeed, it's often the case that you see these neo-Nazi organizations today, they'll have these poster girls that they stick up front who aren't aesthetically challenged, and in a way to try and make the whole thing, the organization, seem a bit more acceptable. Anyway, sorry, I came completely off the point there. Anyway, so Ian says it was his uniform that seemed to bring out the very worst in him. I think lots of people are like that. You know what? I think we're possibly all like that to a certain extent. The uniform changes us. So Colin says he was the protector of Bohemian Moravia, and he probably believed it. He was protecting Heydrich, fit the Aryan model of a blonde, tall male. Yes, he did. Right. So and it was Albert Foster who mentioned to one of his sidekicks that if he looked like Himmler, he probably wouldn't be going on about the Aryan model male. And so Czechoslovakia is a faraway country about which we know nothing. Paraphrasing Colin's paraphrase what the Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, said at the time of handing there wasn't the time he handed everything over, but I think it was just before he did that. The plan to kill Heydrich was called Operation Anthropoid, and a grenade was thrown, a gun at the Heydrich's car. The submachine was a Sten, and it jammed. It was very highly prone to that. In fact, indeed, I mean, even when I was in the army, the Sterling, which was the replacement for the Sten, was highly prone to jamming. And not only that, it could go, both of them just go off highly. It was a cheap weapon to manufacture. But it was highly unreliable. And then again, in a situation like that, when there was a hit on something, because if that's what it was, then it was the sort of weapon that would have to be used. Heydrich got horsehair splinters stuck in his spleen, and that was what killed him. It's called sepsis. He could have been saved, says Otto. He could have been saved with antibiotic. Yes, had penicillin, which was available in the United Kingdom, had penicillin been available, then he would have survived, but it wasn't. There's a place in Praed Street in Paddington in London, and you can see the blue plaque where it was invented or found. For the first, wasn't invented, it was found. Anyway, so yeah, she never faced prison. Right. So Otto writes, I was 19 years old when I first traveled to Europe, but while in Munich, I contacted a family. Their son gave me a tour of Munich, and we wound up in some German family's apartment, but the father was a surviving member of the Luftwaffe, and he laughed about telling me how a woman stormed out of the apartment when he told her he's still a Nazi. He couldn't believe this. Yeah, I couldn't believe that was in 1974. The thing about this, and I will want to put this in context, is there are people who sort of enjoy themselves during wars. There are some things. You get the comradeship, you get the all lads together. You've got which is, I can understand that, knowing that you're younger, and when you look back at something, it happened 30 years later, and you're much older, and you've got to use the toilet 15 times a night and things like that. So you look back on the times when you were young as being better. So that is, to a certain extent, is understandable. But anyway, so Cato writes, after watching the movie Escape from Sobibor, that is when I began reading more about the Holocaust and the book The Forgotten Revolt by the late survivor Thomas Teufer-Blatt. Well, thank you, Cato. You'd be absolutely... I lived with Teufer-Blatt in both Warsaw and in Santa Barbara. And so in fact, lots of people thought I was his son. And he would be utterly... he'd be super happy that you said that about him. Anyway, right, so visiting Treblinka gave me nightmares for a long time, says Colin. Yeah, I took my mother to Pierznica Wielka, and which I shouldn't have done. I thought, oh, it's only a forest, she won't see anything, she'll understand what's going on anyway, she can't read the signs. And she said the same thing happened to her, and I didn't tell her what happened there. So the thing is, Treblinka, it really is very attractive. I remember when I went to Auschwitz the first time in September 1982, and I saw the standing cells, and that I couldn't sleep after that. I was on the train. I was on from Krakow to Gdynia, and that haunted me. But anyway, so yeah, I can say, mind you, there's other things as well, though. You know, things I've seen in Ukraine even last year, which anyway, I'll tell you about once the war's over. Right. Also says, Klaus Landsman sure 15 hours of interviews with the Holocaust. It's Klaus Landsman more than anybody else who got me into doing this. Sorry, I never knew him. I think he's dead now. But it was the thing. It's places I know really well now, such as where he's filming on Helmno nad Nerem. So I spent lots of time in that area, and it was that. And to be quite honest, if I'd applied myself more differently in the 90s, I could have added much more to it, because there were still people alive. I mean, I used to go around looking for people, older people, and getting them to describe things, and they would be doing this like 20 years ago. We'd do this in the summer, so we'd go out the weekends and in the Lublin area above all, and we'd look for people who looked old, and then we'd get them to talk to us. And obviously now, anybody who remembers anything is going to be 100 effectively. So it's not very easy to find people like that. I remember one thing, I was in Germany, and there was somebody, and I was asking around, oh, hey, go ask that him, he's really old. Yeah, she said, he's 45. Oh, 45 and he's still alive? Anyway, that's... So cheers, Ian. A great video, thank you, excellent, thank you. Treblinka is discussed in a Landsman film. In fact, they recorded a colonel who was there, but he didn't know he was being recorded. But Treblinka was a horror. Yes, in the no, there was no colonels at Treblinka, but yeah, he recorded. He was born in the Sudetenland. I've forgotten his name now, but he wasn't a colonel. He was a staff sergeant. Name's gone. Franz Suchermel. Was recorded secretly, and the thing was this, that Landsman lied to him, and this was wrong. He shouldn't have done that. But Suchermel had been happy to give interviews until this time. He'd spoken to lots of people. He'd spoken to Gitta Sereni, for example. After Landsman tricked to him and lied to him, he never gave another interview again. And so from that point of view, I've just said how much I admired Landsman, but that was wrong. He shouldn't have done that, even though Suchermel was a guard at Treblinka. I think his testimony was worth something, and Landsman, by what he did no service, not only to history, but also to, maybe more importantly, to the memory of the deceased. Anyway, so right. So Paul writes that maybe the people who are presumably who are trying to dig up Heydrich's grave were trying to find his ring and his revolver. I don't know, because the rings were supposed to go back to Wewelsburg Castle. and that's another place I did the filming for that in 2019. Still haven't put the video together. But the revolver, I don't know. Was he be buried with a revolver? I don't know. Maybe he was. I don't know. Good point. Right. So, God's daughter. Was the estate of Jungfernbrechen owned by a Jewish family prior? Just curious. It seems that Hitler tended to gift quite a number of Jewish properties. You know what? I can't remember who owned the property at Jungfernbrechen. It is in Robert Gavath's book, and I've read it about 3 times, and now I've forgotten. I can't remember if it was a Jewish owner or it wasn't. There was, yes, it was a Jewish family. Sorry, I've got the story. It's come back now. And one of the things was, though, there wasn't a heating inside it, and so they had to actually install the heating, and that would have come at a huge cost. So you imagine about this property which was built sometime in the past, and so it was until that time maybe it was only being used in the summer or something, which to me seems a bit dodgy, because I mean you don't want things getting wet and all the rest. But anyway, that's a real estate problem. And so the family that owned it previously had been forced to move out, and so then the Nazis actually obtained it, and so then Hitler very kindly give it to somebody else. I doubt that the family, if there were anybody survived, got it back either in communist times. Katos asked, how about Bauschutz? I don't know. What about Bauschutz? And Kate says, you guys should organize and visit those sites. Well, yeah, I do appreciate that from Kato's position in Uganda, it's going to be a bit awkward to do something like that. But I visit these sites all the time. We've got videos every single death camp in Poland. I haven't been to the one outside of Minsk, I don't suppose until the current dictatorship there is overthrown. Let's hope it will happen one day. But we've been talking about being overthrown for the last 25 years, and it's still there. But I have been every death camp there is, and I've got film from every death camp in Poland, either on this site or on the other site. So I have got it. Majdanek near Lublin, Poland is very well preserved, worth a visit. Indeed it is. That's from Janet. Majdanek is in excellent condition. I've got a video of that as well. But I got locked in there one night, and so the security locked the place up, and I had to get out by climbing over the barbed wire fence. And there was 3 of us got locked in. There was a couple there as well. I'd never met them before, so we did it in that one way that he got over first, then I helped her over one side, and he helped her down the other. Then I went over the fence. Anyway. So Spirits writes through that the Heydrich was buried in his full dove grey SD uniform with all his medals, sword and Luger. Okay, so he did have his Luger and his sword. Well, that'll be worth something. And Senor writes, Rip Jan Kubish and Josef Gabčík, they were the part of the hit team that got Heydrich. Fegelein wasn't bad looking. Okay, well, it's a matter of taste. I mean, maybe the one in the film wasn't. In Downfall, yeah, but mind you, most of them in Downfall did actually look like that, except for Goering. I thought the one did good, but the rest of them were brilliant. Goering was handsome before the beer hall putsch. Yeah, maybe, because Goering became a drug addict as a result of the beer hall putsch. He was wounded. I did a video on this one as well, how he got wounded, and then how he was saved. And but the pain, he needed painkillers and opiates, and he became addicted to them, as many people have become addicted to opiates. And that might have had something to do with his ballooning. Now I know a little bit about nutrition, and that. Oh, it's probably better. Here, I'll close this as well. Does that make any difference? Or should I? I don't know. So that could have had an effect on him. I tried to follow this if that would make a difference, but anyway, it could have been because he just kept stuffing himself. But he was. A lot of people get fatter as they get older. Right, Albert Speer. Albert Speer. Yeah, maybe Albert Speer was relatively good looking as well. The thing is, he would have worked for anybody. This is the thing. He was a technocrat. He wasn't a believer in the Nazi system as the Nazi system. If it had been anybody else, he would have done it. He was totally career minded, as were many people in the Third Reich. They were just totally career minded. They went along with it. IE in a German word is pronounced E. Yes, that's correct. And EI is pronounced like I, like that. So as you got ein, EI, and IE, lead, not allied, LIE. Yeah, his daughter writes, it's interesting that you had mentioned the aesthetically challenged theory. I'd considered this one, contemplated Himmler's behavior in particular. Yeah, this was something I thought of at school. I can remember, not school, at university. I can even remember, though, in an essay that I wrote, I brought the subject up now, and the what with me being more sort of right wing then, and the professor being somewhat left, and he did say he didn't agree with my views, but he wasn't marking it on my views, but of course then you couldn't say it directly because it was you'd be insulting the people personally, but I mean okay, I'm throwing this one open to you. Maybe there's a reason. There was something in the film Spartacus. Okay, I accept it. It's not true. It's a novel, but it's not a novel. It was a fictional film, largely fictional. But there's one bit where one of them he says, you know, you and I are corpulent, and we people who are corpulent, we intend to enjoy life. It's so that people who are fat don't do bad things, where it's people who are thin who cause all the problems. And okay, so sweepstakes. I don't know how Goebbels reconciled his looks and physical deformity. Yeah. No, I think it's this though. I think that Goebbels was so good at catching the lasses because of who he was. I think that had something to do with it. I'm not suggesting he didn't have a lot of charm and all the rest of it. He does appear to have charm when you actually see him and you read things, people he actually knew. But on the other hand, you can also read accounts, which I will do on this channel because I've written these things of the women who well, effectively it was rape, and they recounted it afterwards. I mean, I don't know if rape is the right word, but it was sexual abuse because of who he was, a Harvey Weinstein sort of type of situation. Well, that was worse because in the case of Goebbels, if Harvey didn't sleep with Harvey Weinstein, maybe he wouldn't be in this film. But in the case of Goebbels, he wouldn't be in any film. And right, so good night, Alan. Good night, all. Excellent night's work. Thank you. Maybe they wanted his Nazi pin. Okay, yes, true. So great remake later, but if Goering was around now, he'd be all over Instagram, yeah, probably. Yeah, and Speer avoided the death penalty because he was good looking. Good point. Yes, that David Irving says that. Yes, yes, she did have people with forced labor was on the estate there. Yeah, and Goebbels was a clever and intimidating. Some women are attracted to power. I think that is true. I was trying not to be so. I was trying not to be sexist when I said that. So yeah, Ian says Goebbels was taking advantage of his position and exploiting women. Indeed. Okay, thanks very much. Look, I've got another live thing to do in 2 minutes time, so I'm going to have to actually finish now. But thank you very much. I wasn't expecting this one to go on this long. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I haven't decided yet, but there will be one tomorrow. No, on my other channel I'm talking about finance and money, economics. But as far as what's going to be on this channel tomorrow, I don't know yet, but there will be something. I usually talk about things when I want to get it out my system. So thanks very much for watching. Thanks Annie, God's daughter, and yeah, everyone else. Crafty. Oh, sorry, no, sorry, Cheap.
Ian, thank you very much, thank you, all the best, and bye.